Ma'am, we need to verify your immigration status. ID, now.
I was born in Atlanta. I'm a nurse. I'm going to work.
You're being detained. Step aside, sir. This doesn't concern you. She says she's American. On what basis are you detaining her? Sir, final warning. Step back or you're under arrest. Then arrest me. But you're not taking her without a warrant.
Cole reached for his radio. His hand was shaking. He didn't move. That changed everything. By the time it was over, Diane Carter was free. 3 federal agents were facing disciplinary action. And the body cam footage, all 3 angles, had become the most watched law enforcement video of 2025. What you're about to hear is what happened in 18 minutes on a Tuesday morning in Oakland, what it cost one agency, and what it proved about the power of knowing your rights. March 15, 2025. International Boulevard, Oakland, 7:43 in the morning. Spring had arrived early in the Bay Area, the kind of morning where people walked a little faster, a little lighter. Shops were unlocking their gates, buses were running on schedule. The Fruitvale neighborhood was waking up the way it always did, loud, alive, unhurried. Marcus Webb was 31 years old, born in Oakland, raised in Oakland. He'd spent 4 years working as a paralegal at a civil rights firm before joining the new Black Panther Party 2 years ago. He knew the Fourth Amendment the way most people know their home address. He could cite Terry v. Ohio from memory. He understood the difference between a detention and an arrest, between reasonable suspicion and probable cause. That knowledge wasn't academic. In this neighborhood, it was survival. He was doing community patrol that morning. Black beret, black jacket, phone charged, walking the same blocks he'd walked since he was 12 years old. Diane Carter was 44, a registered nurse at Highland Hospital. She'd moved to Oakland from Atlanta 17 years ago and never left. Coffee in one hand, phone in the other, earbuds in. The 7:51 BART train was her train. It had been her train for 11 years. 3 federal agents had parked on International Boulevard at 7:45 a.m. Special Agent Derek Cole, 8 years with ICE. Special Agent Maria Rivera, 5 years in the field. Special Agent James Sung, 4 years, recently transferred to the Bay Area office. They were conducting what ICE calls administrative enforcement operations. Here's what that means and why it matters. Unlike a criminal arrest, administrative immigration enforcement does not require a judicial warrant. No judge signs off, no court reviews the decision. Agents operate on internal agency warrants that carry no judicial authority. That gap between agency power and judicial oversight is where most ICE abuses live. Cole, Rivera, and Sung were operating entirely inside that gap. They saw Diane walking south on International Boulevard, and they decided she was worth stopping. No tip, no database match, no prior contact. Just a black woman walking to work. Cole stepped out first, Rivera followed. Sung stayed near the vehicle, hand near his belt. Diane had her earbuds in. She didn't see them until Cole moved directly into her path. She pulled out one earbud, startled. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Cole showed his badge. We need to see your identification. Diane's face shifted. Confused first, then alarmed. I'm sorry, what? Identification. Now. I'm walking to work. Her voice was steady. Barely. I'm a nurse. My shift starts at 8:30. Rivera stepped closer. Ma'am, we need to verify your immigration status. My immigration status? Diane repeated the words slowly, like she was trying to understand a language she'd spoken her whole life. I was born in Atlanta. I'm a United States citizen. I live 4 blocks from here. We still need to see documentation. I don't carry my birth certificate to catch the BART. Cole's jaw tightened. Driver's license, passport, anything establishing citizenship. Here's what the law actually says, and this is the part most people don't know. American citizens have no legal obligation to carry proof of citizenship. None. A driver's license proves identity. It does not prove citizenship status. When Diane said, I am a citizen, that statement was legally sufficient. ICE had no right to demand more without reasonable suspicion of an actual immigration violation. Diane was not providing reasonable suspicion. She was standing on a sidewalk with a coffee cup and a hospital badge. You're being detained, Cole said, for immigration verification. Diane's hands started shaking. Not because she was guilty, because she understood what was happening. She was a black woman alone being surrounded by 3 armed federal agents who had already decided not to believe her. Fear in that situation is not weakness. It's accurate threat assessment. I told you, her voice cracked at the edges. I'm American. This is my neighborhood. I am trying to get to work. Rivera moved to her left. Sung moved up from behind. 3 agents, 1 woman, a sidewalk in Oakland. That's when Marcus came around the corner. He saw Diane first, then the badges, then Rivera's hand drifting toward her belt. His phone was out before he reached them. Excuse me, Marcus's voice cut through. What's happening here? Cole turned. Sir, step back. This doesn't concern you. Marcus didn't step back. He stepped forward. Sister. He looked past Cole directly at Diane. Did you ask for help? Diane's eyes found his. Relief hit her face like a wave breaking. Yes, they're trying to detain me. I keep telling them I'm American and they won't listen. Marcus positioned himself between Diane and Rivera, not touching anyone, not threatening anyone, just standing, his phone steady lens facing Cole. She's invoked her right to remain silent. His voice was calm, precise, the voice of someone who had done this before. Where is your warrant? Sir, you are interfering with a federal operation. Cole moved closer. Step aside or you will be arrested for obstruction. Then arrest me. Marcus didn't blink. Charge will be dismissed by noon, but you're not taking her without probable cause. Cole reached for his radio. He didn't use it yet. He was calculating. Marcus pulled a laminated card from his jacket pocket. ACLU issued. Know your rights printed in English and Spanish. He held it up so Diane could see it clearly. You have the right to remain silent, he read steadily. You have the right to refuse to answer questions about your immigration status. You have the right to speak to an attorney before answering anything. You do not have to show documents unless they present a judicial warrant with your name on it. Diane straightened. Her hands were still shaking. Her voice wasn't. I am exercising my right to remain silent. I want to speak to an attorney. Rivera stepped toward Marcus. You are obstructing a federal investigation. I am standing on a public sidewalk. Marcus kept his phone level. I am exercising my First Amendment right to observe and document law enforcement activity. Name one law I am breaking. 1. Rivera had no answer. Here's what most people don't know and it matters. The First Amendment protects the right to record police and federal agents in public spaces. Every federal circuit court that has ruled on this issue has reached the same conclusion. Watching is not obstruction. Recording is not interference. Demanding that officers follow the law is not a crime. It is citizenship. Marcus Webb understood this. The agents did not want him to. A woman across the street stopped walking, pulled out her phone, started recording. Then a man outside a laundromat. Then 2 teenagers waiting for a bus. Within 2 minutes, there were at least a dozen people on that sidewalk. Phones up, cameras rolling. One man had gone live on Instagram. The counter was already climbing. Then Amara Davis came around the corner. She was 27, another Panther member, black beret legal pad and hand camera around her neck. She walked directly to Cole, looked at his badge, wrote down the number without a word, did the same with Rivera, with Sung. Officers, her voice was professional, unhurried. I'm documenting this interaction. Badge numbers, names, and timestamps for the record. You don't have authority to demand our information, Sung said. Under California law, Amara replied without looking up from her pad, peace officers must identify themselves when requested. You're operating in our state. I'm not demanding. I'm documenting what's already visible. Cole finally used his radio. We need backup. Multiple civilians interfering with enforcement. International Boulevard near 35th. The dispatcher's response crackled back. Backup was 6 minutes out. Marcus heard it. He kept recording. The crowd had grown to 15 people. A store owner had come out from behind his counter. An elderly woman was watching from her doorway, phone pressed to her ear, calling someone. A news tip, it turned out. Someone had already contacted a local station. Cole looked at Rivera. Rivera looked at Sung. 3 federal agents, surrounded by cameras. No warrant. No probable cause they could articulate. A woman who had invoked her rights. A man who knew the law better than they wanted him to. In a crowd that was not moving. This wasn't going how they planned. Officer Priya Nair had been working the Fruitvale BART station for 6 years. She heard the commotion before she saw it, stepped out of the station entrance, and read the scene in about 4 seconds. ICE agents, a black woman clearly distressed, Marcus Webb, whom she recognized from 3 community safety meetings, 24 civilians recording, Cole's hand on his radio. She walked over. "What's the situation?" she asked. No sides taken. Just the question. "Federal Immigration Enforcement," Cole said immediately. "We need you to clear these civilians." Nair looked at Diane, then at Marcus, then back at Cole. "Is there a judicial warrant with her name on it?" Cole paused. "We're conducting administrative enforcement." "That's not what I asked." Nair's voice stayed even. "Warrant, yes or no?" Silence. "Probable cause." She waited. "Specific articulable facts that led you to believe this woman violated immigration law." Cole started to speak. Stopped. Rivera looked at the ground. Sung looked at the store across the street. Nair turned to Diane. "Ma'am, are you a United States citizen?" "Yes." Diane's voice was exhausted. "I was born in Atlanta. I'm a nurse. I've lived here for 17 years. I was trying to get to work." Nair turned back to Cole. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. She's stated she's a citizen. She's invoked her right to remain silent and requested an attorney. You have no warrant and no probable cause you can articulate. She paused. Let that land. Then she walks. "This is federal jurisdiction," William said. "You can't. This is Oakland." Nair's voice didn't change. 3 words. Final. "You are not taking anyone from this sidewalk without legal justification. Show me a warrant or explain your probable cause. Right now, because from where I'm standing, this looks like harassment." Here's the legal reality behind that moment. California's Trust Act and Values Act are not just political statements. They are binding law. They prohibit state and local law enforcement from detaining individuals on behalf of ICE without a judicial warrant or independent probable cause. Officer Nair wasn't choosing community over law. She was enforcing it. Federal agents operating in California operate inside California law, not above it. Cole, Rivera, and Sung had no authority to demand local police cooperation they were not entitled to. Marcus spoke quietly behind her. "You approached this woman without reasonable suspicion. She told you she was a citizen. She invoked her rights. You cannot articulate probable cause after 5 minutes of trying." He paused. "You're done here." Cole looked at Rivera. A long look. The kind that happens when 2 people realize the same thing at the same time. They were done. Cole spoke into his radio. "Stand down on backup. Situation is resolving." He turned to Diane. His voice had changed. Smaller now. "You're free to go." Diane didn't move immediately. Her legs weren't cooperating. Marcus stepped beside her. "You're okay. Take your time." She nodded, took 1 breath, then another. Then she looked at the crowd. These strangers who had stopped, their morning, pulled out their phones, planted their feet, and refused to look away. "Thank you," she said. To Marcus, to Amara, to Officer Nair, to the woman with the live stream still running, to the elderly man who had never put his phone down. "Thank you." Marcus walked with her to the BART entrance. Amara followed 3 steps behind. They stayed until the train doors closed and the platform was clear. 18 minutes. Start to finish. From the moment Cole stepped in front of Diane to the moment she was on that train, the body cam footage, all 3 agents' cameras running simultaneously, was obtained through a public records request filed that same afternoon. By evening, it was on local news. By the next morning, national outlets had picked it up. By the end of the week, legal scholars were citing it in law review articles. 18 minutes. 18 minutes that cost the agency everything. The internal affairs request landed on April 3rd, 22 days after International Boulevard. ICE's Office of Professional Responsibility doesn't move fast. This time they had no choice. 3 body cams, same scene, same 18 minutes. From 3 different angles, the footage told the same story without contradiction. Cole stepping in front of Diane, Rivera drifting to her left, Sung moving up from behind. Not one moment of articulable suspicion captured on any camera. Not one. Investigators pulled 6 months of field records for Cole Rivera and Sung. What they found wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern, 47 stops. October 2024 through March 2025. Oakland field operations. Of those, 43 were people of color. Of those 43, 31 were United States citizens or lawful permanent residents, released after verification, no charges, no violations, nothing. 31 people stopped detained, questioned, frightened, for nothing. That is a 66% error rate. In any other profession, that number ends careers. In federal immigration enforcement, it had been generating performance reports. Investigators asked Cole to explain his probable cause for stopping Diane Carter specifically. He said she matched the description they were working from. They asked him to produce that description. He could not. They asked Rivera. Same answer. Same inability to produce documentation. They asked Sung. He said it was a judgment call based on experience. Experience, that was the word he used. Not evidence, not behavior, not any articulable fact recognized by constitutional law. Experience. This is how a civil rights lawsuit gets built, and it matters to understand the process. It starts with complaints. Diane filed with ICE's Inspector General with the City of Oakland and with the ACLU of Northern California within 2 weeks of the incident. Each complaint created a paper trail. Each paper trail triggered review. The ACLU referred her to attorney Raymond Osei, a veteran civil rights litigator who had argued 4 federal cases against law enforcement agencies in the previous 3 years. Osei reviewed the footage, reviewed the complaints, reviewed the internal affairs preliminary findings. He filed a federal civil rights lawsuit in the Northern District of California in July 2025. The charges were precise: unlawful detention under the Fourth Amendment, racial profiling in violation of the Equal Protection Clause, intentional infliction of emotional distress. The defendants were Cole Rivera and Sung individually, and ICE as an agency. Then came discovery. Discovery is where patterns become evidence. Osei's team subpoenaed everything: the 3 body cams, the 47 stop reports, the agents' field notes, their training records, their prior complaints if any existed. The 47 stops didn't just support the lawsuit. They became the lawsuit's spine. October 14, 2025, Federal Courthouse, San Francisco, the gallery filled before 9 a.m. community members from Fruitvale, Panther members in black berets, hospital staff wearing scrubs with Highland Hospital badges, immigration rights advocates, 3 law school classes attending as observers, local press in the back, 2 rows. This was not just Diane Carter versus 3 federal agents. Everyone in that room understood what it actually was. 12 jurors took their seats. The body cam footage was the first exhibit entered into evidence. All 3 angles synced and simultaneous. The jury watched 18 minutes of video before a single witness took the stand. Then Diane testified. She spoke quietly. Nurses learned to do that. Steady voice for hard information. I was walking to work. I do it every morning. I've done it for 11 years. She paused. And suddenly 3 people with federal badges and guns were surrounding me on the sidewalk demanding I prove I'm American. I was born in Atlanta. My mother was born in Georgia. My grandmother was born in Georgia. How far back do I have to go? Attorney Osei asked her what she was thinking when Rivera moved to her left. I was thinking, what if Marcus hadn't come around that corner? Her voice held, barely. What if no one had stopped? Would they have taken me? Would I have missed my shift, lost my job, spent days in a detention facility, while they verified what I'd been saying from the first sentence? She looked at the jury. The only reason I'm sitting here instead of telling a different story is that a man I had never met decided to stop walking and stand beside me. Her therapist had testified the previous day. Post-traumatic stress diagnosis confirmed. Diane had changed her route to work. She could not see a federal vehicle without her heart rate spiking. She had developed a habit of checking over her shoulder that she could not stop. Textbook hypervigilance. Textbook traumatic response to an unjust detention. Marcus took the stand after lunch. Where Diane had been emotional, Marcus was methodical, precise. He walked the jury through each decision he had made, each law he had cited, each right he had invoked on Diane's behalf. The defense attorney tried to reframe him. You positioned your body between federal agents and their subject. Isn't that obstruction? I stood on a public sidewalk, Marcus replied. I did not touch anyone. I did not threaten anyone. I informed a citizen of her constitutional rights, and I demanded that federal agents articulate their legal basis for detaining her. He looked at the attorney calmly. They couldn't. That's not obstruction. That's the system working correctly. You told them they had to release her. Oh, I told them what the law required. Citizens have always had that right. If an officer is violating the Constitution, I can tell them so. That's not interference. That's education, Officer Prionair testified in the afternoon. Clean, factual, unambiguous. Those agents had no legal basis for that detention. Mr. Webb correctly identified the applicable law and correctly demanded they follow it. Citizens have the right to witness law enforcement actions. They have the right and document them. They have the right to demand accountability. She paused. That is not obstruction. That is democracy functioning as design. Dr. Sandra Okafor, sociologist from Stanford, took the stand on day 3. She had spent 20 years studying enforcement pattern data. A 66% error rate is not aggressive enforcement, she told the jury. It is systematic rights violation. When 2/3 of your stops produce no enforcement action because the person detained has done nothing wrong, you are not targeting violators. You are targeting a demographic. The statistics do not suggest racial profiling. They confirm it. The defense called Cole to the stand. Osei asked him 4 times to state the specific, articulable facts that led him to stop Diane Carter on March 15th. 4 times, 4 different phrasings. Cole could not answer. Not once. Attorney Raymond Osei stood for closing arguments on the 5th day. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. This case is not complicated. 3 federal agents stopped a woman who was committing no crime. They demanded she prove her innocence. She told them the truth, and they didn't believe her. The only thing that prevented her illegal arrest was a community member who knew the law and refused to look away. He let the room hold that. In this country, you are innocent until proven guilty. You do not have to prove you belong here. They have to prove you don't. He looked at the jury. They couldn't then. They can't now. They never could. The jury deliberated for 7 hours and 14 minutes. When they returned, the 4 women read the verdict without hesitation. Liable, all counts, unanimous. The damages were announced the following morning. $350,000 in compensatory damages. For Diane's trauma, for her therapy, for the anxiety attacks, for the route she changed, for the mornings she still checks over her shoulder on International Boulevard. $500,000 in punitive damages, split among Cole Rivera Sung and the agency. Designed not to compensate, designed to hurt, designed to make the next supervisor think twice before sending agents out without probable cause. $850,000 total. Cole was demoted and transferred out of the Bay Area field office within 30 days of the verdict. Rivera received a formal reprimand and mandatory retraining. Sung was suspended without pay for 2 weeks. None lost their positions entirely, but every future employer, every future oversight review, every future case they touched would carry November 18, 2025 attached to their names. ICE's Oakland field office rewrote its operating procedures before the end of the year. No stop without specific articulable suspicion documented before approach. Mandatory body cam activation for all field operations. Community liaison positions created to rebuild trust with Oakland PD. Whether those changes hold, that depends on who is watching. Diane Carter resigned from Highland Hospital in January 2026. She went to work for an immigrant rights nonprofit in the Fruitvale neighborhood, 3 blocks from where it happened. She wanted her worst morning to mean something permanent. Marcus Webb had already been speaking at schools and community centers across California before the verdict. After it, the invitations tripled. He carries the same laminated ACLU card. He reads from it at every session. The body cam footage is now used in training programs, law schools, civil rights organizations, and quietly in at least 2 federal agency compliance courses as an example of what not to do. Before we leave this story, 3 things everyone should know if ICE ever approaches you. First, you have the right to remain silent. Use it immediately. Do not explain. Do not justify. Say the words. Second, you have the right to refuse to answer questions about your immigration status and to speak to an attorney before saying anything. Say those words too. Third, if you are a citizen, you are not required to carry proof. Your statement is legally sufficient. What tips the balances March 15th proved is whether someone is standing beside you who knows that. Know your rights. Record everything. Don't look away. The camera was rolling the whole time. It always was.